Wolves were gone, the educational sign on the cage had read for most of the country. They were the villains of fairy tales, and there had been vast campaigns to exterminate them all across the continent. A slaughter of the wolves along with the buffalo, long before that in the late Pleistocene, according to the sign, the Clovis people had caused the extinction of the cave bear, the giant beaver, the saber-toothed tiger, the horse, and the mastodon. He buttoned his shirt without looking at his fingers, eyes on a weather map on the television, a smiling weatherman pointing and gesturing. He had wanted the old wolf to come close to him, head down, softening, as though all wild animals could one day be tamed, as though this was an aspect of all of them, this one day tameable quality, and their wildness was nothing more than coyness or mannerism, as though other animals should not only submit to people, but behave like them, comport themselves with civility. Privately, he thought, at the heart of it, you wanted animals to turn to you in welcome. It was a habit gained from expecting each other to do this, from expecting this of other people, and only knowing people, not knowing anything beyond them. That was another kind of solitude, the kind where there was nothing all around but reflections. And what about the endless differences of the animals, their strange bodies? Many legs, stripes, a fiery orangeness, curved teeth or tentacles, wings or scales or sky blue eggs. Instead of looking at the wolf as an animal he never knew and never could, as with the sacred and the divine he had fallen into the trap. He had wanted it to lick his hand and lope along beside him. The animals were very busy with dying, not only one at a time, but in sweeps and categories. This he found increasingly distressing. He began to comb newspapers for the latest word about animals vanishing. He began subscribing to magazines. In magazine pictures, he saw animals far away, in places where they had been born and either continued to live or began to die off. Some were in backgrounds of green, others yellow, others a bright turquoise, white now and then, Siberia or the Arctic. These were the places of the animal's origin, warm green, dry yellow, and wet deep blue. Then there was the gray of human habitation. The blue places were turned into brown, the yellow places to dust, the green places to smoke and ashes. Each time one of the animals disappeared, they went by species or sometimes by organizations of species, interconnected. It was as though all mountains were gone or all lakes. A certain form of the world. But in the gray that metastasized over continents and hemispheres, few appeared to be deterred by this extinguishing or even to speak of it. No one outside fringe elements and elite groups, professors and hippies, small populations of little general importance. The quiet mass of disappearance, the inversion of the arc, was passing unnoticed on this hot globe. A third of all species would soon be gone. The flocks of passengers, pigeons, that had once darkened the sky, Teddy Roosevelt on safari shooting hundreds of animals for a train. He saw a list from one of Roosevelt's trips to Africa in 1909, 512 animals shot, including 17 lions, 11 elephants, 20 rhinos, 9 giraffes, 47 gazelles, 8 hippos, and 29 zebras. George V of England had killed 1,000 birds in one day for sport. In a year, the Roman Emperor Titus had 9,000 captured animals killed in popular displays. He soon learned to recognize the signs of an animal's imminent disappearance. Some were tagged or collared or photographed. Some monitored by bureaucrats. Sometimes a group or individual took up the cause of an animal or a plant and could muster the rationale for a lawsuit, and often the court favored the victim. But the victim remained a victim, and for each victim whose passing was noted, thousands more slid away in the dark. From where he stood, they succumbed with great ease. From where he stood, they had always been invisible anyway. Animals in the outside were far from his life, but zoos were close at hand. Zoos would be his study. His practical lessons took place at night time, which left his days free for commerce. At first, he read mail-order manuals, but soon they left him at loose ends, and he hired a locksmith to teach him. The locksmith, a Brazilian, came to his apartment twice a week and brought his full toolkit: hooks, racks, diamonds, balls, tension wrenches. They practiced on T's door and cabinets, on a variety of locks. The locksmith installed for that purpose. After the lesson, the locksmith would often stay for a nightcap. T had assured him that he would not use his hard-won knowledge to commit crimes against persons or property, and though he had the impression the locksmith could not care less whether he used his powers for good or for ill, the friendly assurance served as a bridge between them. Criminal trespass would be the limit, he said jokingly. The Brazilian stayed to drink with him on Fridays and sometimes played a few hands of cards. His nights were not always free. However, he was still not delivered of Fulton, his investor. Despite the fact that he had professed bursitis to get out of playing racquetball, Fulton's wife had taken him under her wing. As a young man with no clear defects or blemishes, with his health and his wealth and a full head of hair, he was apparently eligible and became an object of desire for many women newly introduced to him. It was Janet's calling to bring him and these wanton women together. Janet did not believe it was feasible to be single. To Janet, a bachelor eked out his living on the margins of society, orbiting the married couples, wild-eyed and feral as a homeless man at a polo party. A single man to Janet was superior in the social hierarchy only to single women. This last, a life form that was repellent but fortunately short-lived, naked and glistering as it gobbled its way out of its lava cocoon. Because Fulton was an investor, T could not refuse his hospitality on every occasion, and so at least once a week he found himself a dinner guest at Fulton's house in Brentwood. It was an article of faith with Janet that when men brought wealth to the table, women must bring good looks. And since this was Los Angeles, there was always someone sitting across from him, not too much older than he, for Janet had imposed a limit of 30 to allow time for courtship, engagement, and a brief honeymoon followed by reproduction, whose hair had been bleached, breast lifted, or nose pinched into narrowness above delicately flared nostrils. Janet was a homemaker by choice, a Texas debutante whose father had gifted her with a dowry that had made her attractive to a legion of Fultons. What distinguished her own Fulton was chiefly that he had beaten other suitors to the punch. So the women she brought to meet T were seldom burdened by such useless accessories as an academic record or a sense of social purpose. They tended to be certain of their attractiveness and accustomed to admiration. They were eager to begin a conversation with him, but not always sure where to take it. One of them asked him what he did for a living, and then, after he told her, smiled, twirled her hair around a finger, and gazed at him glazily, as though fully expecting him to run with the discussion from that point onwards. At first he tried to be polite to show deference to Janet, but as the dinner wore on over the weeks, he saw he had to discourage the women, smoothly and cannily, without allowing them to say precisely what it was in his manner that had pushed them away. Janet should see only that the women, despite their initial surge of interest, would never quite warm to him. He applied himself thus to the task of quiet repulsion, and as he grew competent at lock-picking, the pace of Janet's dinner invitations began finally to slacken. "I don't know what your problem is, man," said Fulton, as he was leaving one night, following an encounter with an interior decorator named Leachy, who had wished to talk only of upholstery. "Why don't you make a move for once?" "Listen, Janet needs to stop setting me up," said T gently. "I appreciate her good intentions, but I'm not in the market." "Jesus, you don't have to marry them," said Fulton. "Not me," said T. "That's hardcore," said Fulton. In New York, for a business meeting, he drove to the Bronx at night. The lock was easy, a low metal gate in the grove of thin trees, then a walk across a dark, wide square, lights reflected on a sea lion pool. On the second lock his fingers slipped nervously, but soon he was in. His neck was wet and his heart rate rapid. He heard the rush of blood in his ears. He slipped the tools back into his pack, stood still and made himself slow his breathing. He had read a zoo press release. The most endangered mammal in the world, the Sumatran rhinoceros, has not bred in captivity since 1889. Penlight beam focused, he read the card. Diasaurorhinus sumatranensis. It was the only one in captivity in the United States, and it was a dinosaur. Its species had lived for 15 million years, and there were only a few hundred left, a female. She hauled herself up as he stood there, hauled herself up and walked a few steps away. She was nosing hay or straw, whatever dry grass littered the floor of her room. She gave an impression of oblong brownness. The Sumatran rhinoceros he had read liked mud wallows. Here there was nothing but floor. He was standing where any zoo patron could stand, and there was no danger or special privilege. Still, no one was around. He was alone with her, and he was content. It was not to claim the animal's attention that he was here, but to let her claim his. She was the only one of her kind for thousands of miles across the wide seas. What person had ever known such separation? The Sumatran rhinoceros reportedly had a song, difficult for the human ear to follow. Its song had been mapped, and similarities had been found between this song and the song of the humpback whale. It was not singing now. Sight was less important to a rhinoceros than to him. He knew that, but she still had to see. He put his hand to his nose, blocking sight between his own two eyes, closing one and then the other. He had read that the vision of many animals was diachromatic. They saw everything in a scheme based on two primary colors, not three. Were they red, he thought, red and blue? He closed his own eyes, heard the rise and fall of his chest, and nearby a rustle whose nature he could not discern. Behind the eyelids it was thick and dark, but impressions of light passed there, distracting. They passed like clouds he found himself idly drawn to interpret, to fix into the shape of rabbits or swans. After a while, the rhinoceros sighed. It was a familiar sound, despite the fact that they were strangers. He knew the need for the sigh, the feel of its passage. A sigh was not a thought, but a substitute for one. A sigh of grief or affection, of putting down something heavy that was carried too long. In the wake of the sigh, he wondered exactly how lonely she was, in this minute that held the two of them. Maybe she saw beyond herself, the future after she had disappeared. Maybe she had an instinct for the meaning of boundaries and closed doors, of the condition of her captivity, or the terminus of her line, hers and her ancestors'. Maybe she had no idea. He put his hand against the cool wall and felt almost leaden. No other animal could have eyes shaped like these. See the ground and the trees from this place was this dinosaur's consciousness. No other hide would feel the warmth of the sun wash over these molecules, and neither he nor anyone would know how it had felt to live there, in both the particulars and the generalities, the sad quiescence of the animal's own end of time. He never spoke of his incursions and guarded carefully the difference between himself and the self that was available publicly. This was a clear benefit of being alone. A partner would have broken the seal. With meticulous care, he planned his business trips in relation to sanctuaries and captive breeding facilities, finding reasons to fly to these places even when profit was unlikely. Undetected, he entered a bird sanctuary in San Diego, a rescue center for manatees scarred by boat propellers, a butterfly habitat in New Hampshire, a laboratory in Rhode Island where American burying beetles were bred and released.